At that point, I was far more terrified of locking down than I was of the disease. Way more worried about the restrictions that they were going to impose, way more than the disease. Do you know, I think it's because I know how the media works. From being a page 3 girl, I knew how the media worked. That's one of the things. So, like, for example, we knew what would sell. I used to set up stories and all sorts, not on other people, on myself, because we knew that would sell, right? And then when I was doing the Housewives, for example, they would pick the most negative things because they did something which was called splitting the audience. See, and this is what I was saying, like at the start, the fear was being ramped up to the point where, you know, people were thinking that all these deaths were from like a disease, but no one was thinking about what they had been doing with such drugs and then, you know, ventilators and everything else. So, you know, it was just, I think the evidence is there really, if people want to look. And that's the thing, they're never going to show it on the BBC. They're never going to show it on ITV or Sky News. It's like, I do think democracy's dead. And it's the same, you know, just as we have, I think it's actually been dead for a very long time. And the illusion that it's even alive is dead now, because when they installed Richie Sunak, who no one voted for, I think it was pretty obvious then that this is like, you know, it was a coup. And this is a guy that's being now installed into it. Because I called out the Ukraine and Russia war right at the start for exactly what it was, you know, and then everyone's blaming these price hikes on Putin. And then you see that British Gas, Exxon, Shell, they're all recording their record profits, like 4 times higher than the profits last year. But we want to blame, you know, we're going to blame Putin for it. So there's a lot of convenient excuses. You have to think about how you can barter, what skills you can swap, what, you know, products you can swap, you know, have cash, have goods that you can trade and swap. So I think it's something that people, you know, need to think about without driving them. And that's the thing, without driving themselves into a place of fear.
Welcome to the Radical Health Rebel podcast with your host, Leigh Brandon. If you enjoy the podcast, please leave a 5-star rating and a warm review. Your opinions are important, and your ratings help grow the podcast and help educate people to lead a healthier, more productive, fulfilling and happy life. If video is your thing, please check out the Radical Health Rebel YouTube channel, where you'll find fun bite-sized clips from each episode. And now, here is Leigh, the Radical Health Rebel, with this week's podcast.
Leilani Dowding, welcome to the Radical Health Rebel podcast. Thanks for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me.
It's been a while getting you on the show, so I'm really looking forward to this. And, you know, just want to say thanks for, you know, taking your time out today.
Oh, no problem. Honestly, I'm not doing much, just riding horses.
So today's episode is entitled Conspiracy, Corruption and Collectivism with Leilani Dowding. So the last 3 years has seen the biggest attack on freedom in the Western world in our lifetime. And we're currently facing a war between globalist technocrats and the rest of humanity. Sadly, the majority of humanity are still supporting the very people who are planning to take away all our freedoms, privacy, and even our own thoughts. This week, I've invited social commentator and Ickonic presenter Leilani Dowding to discuss the conspiracies, corruption, and move towards collectivism over the last 3 years, what the biggest threats are moving forward, and how we can emerge victorious in this war on humanity. So, Leilani, to kick things off, would you share with the audience a little bit about you, perhaps your upbringing, your education, and your career to date?
So I grew up in a really normal household, actually. My parents are still together, just kind of middle class, had ponies, was very lucky. I've got to say it was quite, I suppose it was quite a privileged background. We weren't super rich, but, you know, my parents gave us whatever they could. And the most important thing was like good food, good healthy food, I suppose. And that's where I've got that health thing from. I went to uni and I studied economics, and I thought I wanted to be a banker. So thank God I left, because that would not have been the career for me. And I left because I got spotted while I was at uni for Miss Great Britain. I ended up winning that competition, and Miss Universe was the same time as my end of year exam. So I thought I'd just leave and come back a semester later, but started modeling, did a bit of TV and stuff, moved to America, lived there for 17 years, did loads of jobs. I thought the world was going to end, so I trained to be a massage therapist so I could barter if the world as we know it ended. I started doing real estate. I did a couple of more TV shows there. Then I moved back to England, thank goodness, about 3 years ago. And I ended up doing a reality show back in the UK called The Housewives of Cheshire. So it was part of, the franchise, the Bravo franchise, Housewives of like New York or Beverly Hills or what have you. And I think that's where people realized I was very outspoken and would say whatever I felt. I ended up leaving that show. I just couldn't do it. They were editing out the most important things in my life, which were family, my pets, my horses, my niece, my fiance. They edited a lot of that out. And then, COVID hit, and I'd been in the media, obviously, because of the housewife. So I was very against everything that was going on. And I think that the media picked up on that. And then, gosh, I never planned on being a social commentator or talking about any of this stuff. It just came to me, I suppose, because people knew that I would say how I felt, which was how a lot of other people were feeling, without being worried about the comeback, because I couldn't get cancelled. I don't work for anybody. I'd already quit the Housewives. I have no more ambition in TV. So I just didn't care. And as I said, I didn't have a boss. I am my own boss. So I could do as I wished.
Awesome. It would have been quite interesting if you were in I'm a Celebrity Jungle with Matt Hancock. I think that might have been quite interesting.
I know. I do wonder if they would have cut out everything I said, because I would not have been able to do the niceties. I can't be fake or lovey. If I don't like somebody, I cannot even pretend for a second. And I would have absolutely blasted him. Like, when I heard it was going on, I wanted to be sick. I was repulsed by the fact that he was going to get paid such a sum of money to go on that show after everything he'd done.
Yeah. Before we carry on, I just got to tell you something quite interesting. So I don't know when we connected on social media, but I think we were definitely commenting on each other's posts in early 2020. And I've been commenting on your posts, and like we might have had a little dialogue online and stuff. And I assumed that you worked in the fitness industry.
Oh,
and not only that, so I'm a Czech practitioner. I, for some reason, assumed that you was a Czech practitioner. Now, I can't give you a bigger compliment than that. Now, I don't know why I thought that. I know there's someone in Australia. She's got a similar name to you, and she does look a little bit like you, and she is a Czech practitioner. I don't know if I just kind of got you two modelled up, but a lot of the things that you were saying online, I knew that, one, you're very smart, and number two, you've done your homework.
Thank
you. I
you.
think that's why I thought you was a Czech practitioner.
Wait, I don't know what a Czech practitioner is. Tell me. Tell me what it is.
So the Czech Institute was founded by a guy called Paul Čech. And we look at the human body from a very holistic point of view. So from a physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual aspect. I don't know any other school that teaches all, a fully holistic system. But even just within, for instance, the physical side of things, we go into so much detail, again, more detail than any other education I know of. So it's based in California, a place that you know very well. So I've spent a lot of time myself in California. And since 2010, I'm now one of the instructors for the Czech Institute. So I teach Czech practitioners. So I've spent a lot of time in a place called Encinitas in California.
Yeah, I know.
Where the Institute used to be. It used to be there. Then it moved to Escondido. I think they still have a building in Carlsbad, but it's now moved even further towards LA, which I've not been there yet. But it's called Rainbow something. But it's kind of halfway between San Diego and LA. But yeah, so I've spent a lot of time in California, not as much as you. because I haven't lived there, but since 2004 till 2019, I was probably going over there most years and spending at least a week over there. So
yeah, no, that's really interesting because I have, I don't know whether it's because I used to post a lot of fitness things and quite just things, a lot of things to do with health, nutrition. I've always kind of been against big pharma, self-healing, all of that kind of stuff. So I don't know. But no, I do. I take that as a compliment. Thank you.
Yeah, and it was quite interesting because I didn't know your background. I was just really commenting on your posts, and, you was clearly saying some intelligent things, and you was clearly seeing through the propaganda. And then I can't remember when it was, but then I found out what your history was, and I was like, oh my God, that's a real surprise, because I thought you were a Czech practitioner, and then when I found out your history, I was like, oh, that's a real surprise. But it was I just thought that was quite funny.
Yeah, no, that's bad.
So I want to take you back to early 2020. So as I mentioned earlier, we were seeing people, in the streets of China, face planting in the streets. And there was a rumor of a novel disease going around. What were your thoughts back then?
Well, I remember being in Los Angeles and I wasn't too concerned. I do remember them, a lot of talk about like this wet market with the animals in. And I guess I didn't pay too much attention to it because, I was in LA, it was happening in China. So that was my initial thing. And then I thought, once I'd moved, I mean, let's say it probably a space of 2 or 3 months until it really started ramping up in the UK and America. And I was back in the UK, and then I started seeing like these tickers, the death rate tickers or the death tickers and how many people were dying. And I was thinking, now this doesn't make sense at all, because I knew a lady in her 90s, it was my friend's grandma who had dementia and cancer, who was one of the vulnerable people, who actually was supposedly had it or tested positive, whatever you want to take that as being, supposedly had it, was a bit sick, but got better. Now, this is a lady that was 90 with dementia, with cancer, and she was okay. And then I was like, this is crazy to me, because you're ramping up all the fear here. But the reality is something very, very different. And, when somebody is ill, and this comes, to mental health as well, when somebody is ill and has something like cancer or something very life-threatening, right? You don't tell them that they are going to die. You are positive and, you'll call up whoever it is. My fiance's had cancer, so he's had people calling him. He's better now. He had cancer. People say, oh, my friend had it. If you wanted to speak to my friend, he's got better. This is how he did it. Try this, try this, try this. You don't say, ring somebody up and say, oh, hi, mate. Here, you got cancer. Yeah, my friend just died of it last week, and this is the stats for how many people are dying. So to me, everything was back to front, and it just sent off alarm bells.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, as we know, if you want to be healthy and you want a strong immune system, the last thing you need is stress.
Right.
Because stress is going to suppress your immune system. But what did the government do? It was all fear. So if they wanted to help people, that would have been the last thing they would have done. They would have tried to reassure people, which is actually what Chris Whitty did right at the beginning. If you remember, he said, look, most of you, this won't be a problem. Maybe 80% of you will get some kind of illness, but it will be a flu-like illness. And a small percentage of you might be hospitalized, and a small percentage of them may well die. Well, that was the truth. But then for some reason, that all flipped, didn't it?
Right. And that's like every other illness, like flu, for example. That's how it works with flu, right? So for them to then lock you down and say you can only go out for an hour a day, and we're going to shut the gyms, and we're going to shut parks, and you can't go out and play football with your mates, and you can't go and do any sport, and you can't go to the swimming pool, and you basically have to sit and be a couch potato to save everybody else. That didn't make any sense to me. That is like the opposite of everything I know. Like, surely, and that's why I got into trouble, because I said, this is actually really, really bad. doing this to people when health comes from being outside, fresh air, vitamin D from the sun, less stress, better rest, a routine you're happy with, all of these things. And this made me into a conspiracy theorist and a completely insane person just for saying what most people know to be true. So we had to do the opposite of that, apparently, to save lives. And that's, I think, kind of what got me in trouble in the start was, getting my social media bans and all the rest of it.
So back in March 2020, I think Italy had just gone into lockdown. So China was in lockdown. Italy had just got, or the northern region, the Lombardy region of Italy had just gone into lockdown. And Boris Johnson kind of said, well, we're not going to go down that route. That's not going to happen. But there was becoming more and more pressure for the UK to go into lockdown. And then Boris Johnson starts changing and sort of saying, well, we might have to. What were your thoughts at that point when it was looking like we were probably going into lockdown?
At that point, I was far more terrified of locking down than I was of the disease. Way more worried about the restrictions that they were going to impose, way more than the disease. Because, my friend's 90-year-old grandma had supposedly had it and was okay. And to me, it was just the reason they got all these people saying, and all the pressure from all these people was because they'd been ramping up the fear. They'd been ramping it up, and the propaganda of all these people just dropping dead in the street. They really, really pushed the fear, and they had no balance on TV as well. They had people like Piers Morgan saying that the government isn't doing enough, as though it was like Ebola or something, an outbreak. And so there was no balance in the media, and any person, I think, like Beverly Turner came out quite early on the TV and said, like, this is crazy, and this is going to cause horrific economic damage and damage to people's mental health. And they were like, absolutely, I don't even know what the word for it, like, people were vile to them. And it was allowed, and they got absolutely blasted on TV for saying what I think a lot of people were thinking and what's logical. Because I was like, how can you stop people going to work? How are they going to pay their mortgages? How are they going to pay their bills? Like, they're going to go through their savings. This is going to be, so stressful to people. And to lock them up, it was great. I live in a nice house. I have horses, so I'm allowed to see my horses because it's an essential, I don't know, it's not an essential worker, but seeing animals and caring for animals is essential, apparently. So I was allowed out the house to see them. And I just thought, God, what if you lived in London and you were in, 3 kids in a little flat and, kids that have to share a room and there's no computers, and what about school? And all these things were going on my head, not thinking how my life would be, because I'd be able to manage, but how everybody else's would, and what would my friends do that need to go to work and they were self-employed and had to earn money to pay for everything. So that's what was in my head. And it really made me angry, and it made me worried. And I hate being worried. It made me far more worried than the disease itself.
Yeah, I mean, my story is exactly the same, pretty much. I mean, I run a business at the time. I had a practice in central London near Oxford Circus. Probably 90% of my income was made at that facility. And then, okay, I did have some online business at that point. I was already kind of going a bit more online. But all of a sudden, 90% of my income was gone, literally gone. And, like you, I was thinking of the consequences. I wasn't necessarily, for my own personal safety, I wasn't worried at all. I've got elderly parents. So for them, I thought, okay, this is something novel. They need to be looked after. But I could see, and it's not just for my own business, but just looking at everyone else and what knock-on effect that would have on everyone else. But then when Rishi Sunak came out and said, well, we're going to pay you all anyway, again, you kind of think, well, who's going to pay for that?
Yeah.
That was the first thing I thought, because money doesn't grow on trees unless you're a, globalist, then it does. So everything they were coming out with, I could just see problem after problem with their so-called solutions, right?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. No, it was terrible.
So this is a question I ask a lot of people. Why do you think that you were, able to see so clearly what was really going on, whilst, most of the population and even most of the medical profession weren't able to really see the reality of the situation? Why do you think that you were able to see it and others weren't?
Do you know, I think it's because I know how the media works. From being a page 3 girl, I knew how the media worked. That's one of the things. So, like, for example, we knew what would sell. I used to set up stories and all sorts, not on other people, on myself, because we knew that would sell, right? And then when I was doing the housewives, for example, they would pick the most negative things because they did something which was called splitting the audience. They liked to split the audience and have the audience bicker amongst themselves because it would bring the viewers back, and people would turn off the telly, they would go home and they would argue about what they saw in that night's episode. Maybe they'd come on Twitter and like complain about something, and it would split the audience. And I could see that that's what the news was doing. Also, I have never trusted Big Pharma. I think I can't remember how old I was when I watched Erin Brockovich. And a Big Pharma, the FDA, the CDC, all of those, and the Environmental Protection Agency. And I remember watching Erin Brockovich and seeing how these big corporations were able to cover up so much. And then Big Pharma, I know how bad so many of the drugs are and how the side effects are absolutely horrific and can affect things. And I know that, through healthy living, a lot of people don't need, the drugs that Big Pharma push, but they push it because it's profitable. So all of these things have made me very untrusting. I don't trust the government, of Big Pharma, of like the globalists, of the corporations, of the media. So I don't trust a lot. So I need to have my own experience to know what I believe in my world. And my world experience of that time, of the people that I knew were getting this so-called disease, they were all getting better. And now, unless they'd been put on a ventilator. So that was a whole other thing. Or unless they'd been given that drug, I won't say it because it's YouTube, that drug given with M when they had gone into hospital, right? So there were a few things that I could see going on, and my personal experience said that it didn't add up. But I was looking for that anyway, because as I said, for decades I've not trusted them.
Yeah, it's interesting when you say you knew people that were getting the novel disease and they were getting better. And this is something that I've thought about, and it's a controversial thing to say out loud. But I've got a feeling you're going to agree with what I think. In your view, was there a pandemic? In the true sense of the word?
No, I don't think there was, because I think people were getting ill, for sure. And I'm not going to say they weren't. There was for sure people getting ill. But there were a lot of other things going on, shoving the people on the ventilators, the drugs that they were given. There's another one that begins with R, ends with mir. There was, other diseases that just didn't even happen that year.
Yeah, like flu.
And so, yes, I think people did get ill. I think a lot of stress made things worse. I think, like I said earlier on, how when somebody gets ill and they don't have that support and they have the fear inside them, that makes things a lot worse, because no one was telling these people, don't worry, you're gonna be okay. There's a lot of panic and whatever. I mean, I even had a cough 2 years before, this thing was supposedly around. And I remember thinking, my goodness, I need to go to hospital. I can't breathe. And I went to the hospital, and the guy was like, yeah, you got a cough. And I'm like, no, I can't. Sometimes I can't breathe. And he's like, yeah, but that's how it works. That's how, you're expelling more air than you're bringing in. And that's how, sometimes it works. And I said, no, but I've had this for like a month. And he's like, sometimes that happens. And I'm, a very fit, healthy person. And I got panicked because everyone was saying, like, go and get yourself checked. You might have pneumonia. You might have this. And that was what was scaring me. as soon as the guy had said to me, you know, you're okay, I just was like, oh, all right. And I was okay. But these poor people, no one was ever saying to them that they were going to be okay. And I think it panics you even more, especially when you've got something respiratory.
Yeah, well, that's the placebo and the nocebo effect, right? So, you know, if you go to a doctor and you believe in that doctor and the doctor says, look, you're going to be fine, that can actually have more of an effect than any drug that the doctor could give you. Or if they say, well, sorry, you're going to be dead in a week. Well, chances are you'll be dead in a week if you believe that doctor.
Yeah.
Right? If it was you or I, we probably wouldn't be affected by it because we don't tend to respect doctors that much. Or in certain situations, that is. But yeah, I mean, you know, stress is going to reduce your immune system. The nocebo effect, you know, having all the fear on television every day, being locked in your home. You know, as we know, most people drunk more, they smoked more, they ate more bad food during lockdown.
They couldn't exercise, they couldn't see family, friends, couldn't give each other a hug, couldn't do all the things that make you happy and social. Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, it's almost like every procedure or every guideline they came out with was actually harmful to your health. It wasn't beneficial.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And I think that's the thing as well, that, you know, a lot of people think, oh God, you know, she might be so mad, conspiracy theorist, you know, what you said about the placebo effect and how psychologically things can make you better or harm you. And I'm a massive believer in that. Like, you know, as I keep referring to, I think I refer it to it because my fiance had it, but like, you know, with cancer, you don't tell somebody they're going to die. You don't, when you're supporting them and you want them to get better, you don't give them the fear.
Medical doctors often do. And that's normally because they haven't been trained to deal with it properly. Right. So, you know, oftentimes someone will go to a doctor and they'll say, sorry, you've got 3 months to live. And the patient often believes them and they think there's no other way because the doctor doesn't know another way.
Yeah.
But the truth is that all of the cures have been buried and hidden, just like a lot of the treatments for this novel disease were as well.
Absolutely.
Right? Because you know, unfortunately, the pharmaceutical industry, they have one goal, and that is to maximize their profits. And if people die in the process, so be it.
Absolutely.
Which, you know, absolutely. A lot of people find that hard to believe, but sadly, it's the truth.
No, it is the truth, and it shocks me that people can't see it. I mean, if we were all really healthy, they wouldn't be very profitable companies, would they? And their main, what would you call it? Where their loyalty lies really is with their shareholders. It's not with, it's not with their customers. And you can see it from all the millions pharmaceutical companies have paid out in lawsuits and what have you, and then just recently it was funny because there was a show on called what was it called, Dope Sick, and it was a real story about Purdue Pharma and the Oxycontin painkiller opioid crisis, and all they cared about was making money. They didn't care who died in the process, and they lied about this drug. They got all these people hooked on opioids. They were like doubling the dose, and there were phrases like, what was it when I can't remember now. Is this like playing Taboo where you got to guess the word? With COVID, when the COVID, they said it escaped the, the old thing that you get in your arm. Do you know what I mean? Right at the start, when it evaded that thing, I'm not going to say the word, when it evaded that, they had a name for it until they realised that everyone else was getting it anyway. Do you know what I mean? What is it called? Something, it's what they called it when people that had the thing were still getting the disease.
I know what you mean. Yeah, I know what you mean. I can't remember the word. I know what you mean. Yeah, it was like it was a random thing. Like
I can't remember the word. But anyway, what they did is, we'll remember the word in about half an hour. What they did is that the same thing happened with these painkillers, right? When the painkillers didn't work, they said they used the same word to say this is why.
Yeah, I mean that's another can of worms, but I just want to touch on that. And this is something, again, as Czech practitioners, we really focus on a lot, is that pain isn't necessarily something that needs to be numbed. Pain is there to teach you something, right? If someone's kicking you in the shin every day and all you do is take painkillers, you're not going to solve the problem, are you?
No.
So whenever we get pain in the body, it's an opportunity to learn what our body's trying to teach us. Whether it's we're not drinking enough water, or, you know, we're working too long hours, that's why we're getting a headache, or whatever it might be, right? But obviously the pharmaceutical industry, all they want to do is numb the pain, because they can just keep giving you that repeat prescription every time, and they're just raking in more and more money. And then that's going to cause some other symptoms or side effects, which they can then give you another drug, which won't deal with the cause of the problem, but it will cause another side effect. And then you've got to take another drug. And then you're on that merry-go-round that you just, you know, almost impossible to get off, right?
And I always think that as well with pain, that it's like it's a warning sign, isn't it? That, you know, if you're getting pain from doing something, it means you probably shouldn't be doing that, because your body is trying to say to you, don't do that. Don't do that. It's not good for me.
Yeah. I mean, if you had a stone in your shoe, the solution from the pharmaceutical industry would be a painkiller. But the solution is to take the stone out of your shoe, right? You know, I mean, that's a perfect analogy, really. But sadly, that's the world that we live in. And talking about shareholders of pharmaceutical industries, what did you think when Bill Gates came out on the BBC and told the whole world that we wouldn't be able to have our freedoms back until everyone on the planet had taken the experimental injection that he'd invested so heavily in?
Well, I think I saw it for what it was. And I was just like, who is this guy to be telling any of us what to do? You can't tell us we can't have our freedoms back. Freedom's a freedom, and it's not for him to take it away. And I thought, you know what? Well, this is the hill I die on, because I'm not having it. It's an experiment to me. It hasn't been around long enough. I'm not going to even be harmed if I catch this so-called thing. Right? So why am I going to inject myself with a gene therapy, with something that's not being tested, and be part of the experiment? I'm like, no, but if I can't travel, I won't travel. And I did get into a panic, because I thought, you know, what if I can't see my horses? What if I'm not going to be able to take them to a horse show? And you know what? It was fine. I thought, you know what? I'll just not go to another horse show. This might be, you know, the last time I can ever compete my horse or take part in anything or go anywhere. And I'm like, so be it. I'll have my own friends, and they'll come to my house, and we will do everything and set up our own little communities where we don't have to do this. And that was my mindset. I'm not complying with this for half a second.
Yeah, definitely. It was interesting. I was on a podcast in, I think it was June 2020, and they were kind of asking me, you know, about what was going on. And I said to them, they're gonna mandate this vaccine. And one of the things they're going to do is they're going to say, if you want to travel, you've got to be up to date with these injections. And they said, well, what about going on holiday? And I said, well, if that means I've got to have this injection, I won't be going on holiday. And they were like, oh, okay, interesting. And then the funny thing was, they invited me back exactly a year later, and they went through all my answers, and I got everything that I predicted was going to happen. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I knew it as well. I knew it. And although they didn't mandate it for jobs aside from for care workers, I said they're going to stop you from being able to do anything. You're not going to be able to work. You're not going to go to supermarkets. They're going to really stop you, because if they can't kind of pressure you into doing it, they will force you, but without force, without holding you down, without physically injecting you. They will take away whatever they can. And yes, I don't think they did it in the UK, because I think so many people got out week after week and protested it, and there was such a backlash. But in other countries they did. And also I thought, you know what's going to happen? This is going to create a place for a lot of fake paperwork, because there are going to be so many people that refuse to do it that they'll have to get fake papers. And I think that's what, you know, and that definitely happened as well. as well. And you know what? I don't blame the people that were like, forced into a situation. But yeah, I think I could see it was going to happen, and people were like, no, it will never happen. They've never done that before. I'm like, there's always a first time. I had doctors saying to me, they'll never do that. They can't do that. I said, wait, I can tell they're pulling away all our freedoms so they can give us our freedoms back under condition.
Yeah.
You're listening to the Radical Health Rebel podcast.
Are you regularly suffering from painful bloating and wind that can be smelly and embarrassing? Are your bowel movements not as they should be, either constipation or diarrhea, or possibly alternating between the two? Do you find the pain is bad enough, but the bloating and cramps make you feel awful and are affecting your everyday life? Do you sometimes feel you can't eat properly because of the wind, bloating and pain? And has your doctor told you that you have IBS, but unable to help find you a solution? Do you feel right now that you simply don't know what's causing your symptoms, and whatever your doctor has suggested hasn't worked, and you feel frustrated that you're still far from having a normal, flat, comfortable tummy? Have you invested a lot of time, energy and money into improving your symptoms and don't wish to waste any more? Do you feel frustrated and depressed and don't feel like you can take part in all the activities you enjoy, and sometimes have to cancel attending events because of the way your tummy feels? Do you fear that if you don't get this sorted, you could end up with a much more serious gastrointestinal disease? Well, if so, what would help you right now is to understand the root cause of your digestive condition, rather than continuing to try to mask the symptoms with over-the-counter or prescribed medications. You need help understanding how factors such as nutrition, gut health, stress, and toxicology affect the digestive system, and how to optimize these factors. You need someone who can advise, motivate, and support you every step of the way, someone who has walked the path before and taught many others to do the same. What you need is my Overcome Your Digestive Issues program. My Overcome Your Digestive Issues program can help you in the following ways. I will help you understand the root causes of your digestive problems and teach you how to approach the condition holistically via expert advice on nutrition and lifestyle factors. The Overcome Your Digestive Issues program will start by ensuring you are on the right diet for you based on your genetics or metabolic type, and one that avoids the foods that are known to exacerbate your condition. We'll go on a journey step by step, learning all the necessary lifestyle changes required to achieve a flat, comfortable, pain-free tummy. Each weekly 30-minute coaching session will include advice, support and guidance specifically tailored to your needs and at a speed that is right for you. Once you're eating right for your metabolic type, you will begin to see changes in how your tummy feels, and we will also uncover all the necessary blocking factors that you may have, and you'll be taught how to reduce, replace or eliminate all the factors that are causing your digestive problems. Ultimately, this program will enable you to achieve a flat, calm and comfortable tummy every day for the rest of your life. For more information about how to improve your gut health and to claim a complimentary no-obligation gut health consultation, please go to www.bodycheck.co.uk, that's BODYCHEK, and fill in the request form at the top of the homepage, and we'll be in contact to arrange a convenient time. Now, back to the podcast. So, with regards to those experimental injections, was there any particular experts or any particular evidence that you were kind of looking at the time?
Yeah, so at the time, very early on, I looked at a couple of American people. There was Dr. Shiva and there was another guy, Dr. Bhattar. So I was listening to them at the start, and they were talking a lot about vitamin D and other protocols. A lot of those got then suspended from social media, but there was a lot of, at the start, American doctors talking about it. I can't remember the name. I remember a doctor called Stella Emanuel, who people really started attacking her because obviously she was going against everything. So they really started attacking her. And there was Simone Gold. There were quite a few other doctors.
She was in prison, wasn't she? They put Simone Gold in prison.
Did they? I didn't know.
For saving patient. Yeah, she did about 2 months in prison.
God. And this is what I mean.
For saving her patients.
It's just, what's happened is so disgusting. So I was listening to a lot of the American ones because it was a while until the English doctors came out and started talking. Obviously now, we see Dr. Asim Malhotra speaking up. But initially for me, I was listening to a lot of the American doctors and the little alliance that they had formed. And, but it was mad because I was trying to explain this to people here and they weren't listening. They weren't listening. And then you saw, well, they're a discredited doctor and this, that, and that. But it's like, no, they've only been discredited because they've been saying this and Big Pharma are clamping down on it.
Yeah, it's interesting. Again, in 2020, I had a lot of debates online with people. I mean, you could call it a debate or an argument, either way. And whenever I would, I was trying to help people. That's all I was trying to help people see what was really going on. And then I would present them with some information. And rather than talk about the information, they would talk about the person. And they say, well, yeah, he's got some really strange ideas about heart disease. So, for instance, Ivor Cummins, right? Oh, yeah, he's got some really strange ideas about heart disease. Well, actually, his strange ideas about heart disease are actually very effective, unlike what the pharmaceutical industry tell doctors to do, right? And then I'd say to them, okay, so you think the person is in some way nefarious or whatever, or they're not accurate? Tell me what it is about what they've said that's not accurate. And they couldn't say anything. They would just attack the person, but couldn't debate on the information.
And that's the thing, and that's happened a lot. That's happened a lot. So, because I was in the lockdown, I spent hours of my days listening to these doctors and, I'd repeat what the doctors say, but no one could ever attack what I was saying because I was repeating what the doctor, but they would always be able to attack me somehow, and I think that's very common. You're not going to, if you can't attack a message, you start attacking the person. Oh, Leilani was just a model. What does she know? Well, I'm just repeating what doctors have told me. And then obviously I came to know these doctors personally where I have them in my phone and, I'm speaking to them. And if I was to repeat them, I just, they would just attack me personally. And I think that is what happens. That is always what happens when they can't attack the message that you're giving.
Yeah. I mean, I remember one guy, I actually know him and I don't know if he remembers, but I was once his boss and I don't know if he remembers me, but I remember, without being too critical, I do remember when I worked for him, remember thinking he's not very bright. But one of the things he said to me is, and I knew he was just trying to slur me. And he's like, oh, just stick to what you do. You just work in recreation. So
here's the thing. When people say that, right, you have to say, well, why is Gates on everything? Gates is being brought out and wheeled out to talk about the vaccines and how we can't have our freedoms. Well, you can't say that because if he was sticking to what it is, he should be sticking to his computer systems, right? So why is he the expert now on these things and green energy and farmland and mosquitoes and all the rest of the things that he's talking about, right? You can't say that. And by the way, I found it. Do you know what I was talking about? And I couldn't remember the word. Breakthrough COVID. Remember breakthrough COVID? Because it's been so long ago, because practically everyone that's had the, thingamajiggy has had breakthrough thingy. And it was the same with this, with the opioids, Oxycontin, when they called it breakthrough pain because the drug wasn't working. They called it breakthrough pain. And people didn't see the similarities. People that would watch that show and see them talk about breakthrough pain and a drug that was highly addictive that made people sick and didn't work, they still wouldn't connect it with the fact that they were saying breakthrough.
Yeah. So another word for breakthrough is it doesn't work.
It doesn't work.
Basically. Yeah, I know Louis Theroux did a program on the opioids, didn't he? Some years ago, which was quite interesting, highlighting, the seriousness of what was going on and how so many people were dying because they were addicted to them. Very sad.
No, it's awful. It's really awful. It's really awful.
I mean, I've worked in health and wellness for 27 years now, and I've I work with clients on a daily basis, and I see that, let's call it overprescription, that goes on when, quite often there are very effective, very safe, natural alternatives. The only difference is it normally requires some effort from the person.
Right.
So obviously taking a pill is no effort, right? But obviously the pharmaceutical industry know that if people are lazy, they're going to take their drug.
Right. And this is, I've had this conversation. Yeah, I've had this conversation with my dad because my dad was prescribed something. He had high cholesterol. I said, Dad, why don't you just try changing your diet to like this? I've just watched this show and this could work. They showed, these people had changed their diets for a week and it had an effect. No, I think, my pills have done the trick. And I was like, oh, that's my dad. And it's really, it's so annoying. And then I think, Dr. Asim Malhotra, who's come out and asked, called for a suspension of the thingy rollout. He for years has been, talking about statins and the overprescription of statins and how, people need to consider whether they can change their health and their diet and their lifestyle and thus their health instead of just going, right, boom, let's get on to statins. And in the US especially, the drug companies, kind of incentivize pushing the drugs to doctors. And, they're no longer allowed to kind of give out bonuses for good prescription, but there's ways around it. They, if somebody's a very good prescriber of a certain drug, they'll give them a speaking engagement, that they get paid thousands for. So, they prescribe a lot of this drug. The drug company then says, oh, you've done so well. Will you be a spokesperson for this? We'll give you thousands of pounds. So really, it's still paying them for overprescribing, but without saying it specifically for it. It's just now a speaking engagement.
Yeah, I mean, if we were living in a just world, doctors would get bonuses for getting people off of drugs because that would mean that they're becoming more healthy. Whereas if you're putting them on more medication, that means they're getting sicker.
And people don't understand that, do they? It's become so twisted and so inverted. I don't think people understand that.
Yeah. And this is, where the corruption comes in, and it's absolutely everywhere. The fact that the pharmaceutical companies control what doctors get taught at medical school. And we know that the regulatory agencies are owned by the pharmaceutical companies. So if they want to get something approved, they just have to pay them money. That's how it works, and a lot of people aren't aware of that. They think that these regulatory bodies are actually trying to look after the people. They're not. They're just making money, No,
absolutely.
And talking of pharmaceuticals, did you at all look into the other potential treatments that actually ended up becoming banned?
Yes, I have horses, so there was one there.
Horse paste.
Yeah, that was funny. Which, totally. Just like carrots are for horses, so you shouldn't eat a carrot, right? Because it's just for horses. Or polo mints are for horses. It's the most stupid thing I've ever heard. When you look at it, when it actually happens, that drug has won Nobel Prize awards for its use in humans, and for river blindness, and it is a very cheap drug, and it is also has very little side effects. There are millions of people on it all around the world because of parasites and stuff, and it's funny that there were countries that did use it, and it helped.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? I mean, in the US, you had Dr. Pierre Corey, and over here we had Tess Lawrie that were really championing it. But then, all the authorities just went after them. Because obviously, as we know, if there was an alternative treatment, they wouldn't have been able to have the emergency use authorization for the experiment.
Absolutely. Right. And actually, if I've read Dr. Fauci's, Robert F. Kennedy's book on Dr. Fauci, the real Anthony Fauci, and I think there's a extract there of a letter that I think it was Dr. Tess Lawrie had written to a scientist in Liverpool talking about it. And it was like, and when you read the letter and the conversation between them, you just think, wow, this is just so corrupt. He knows what's going on, but obviously he's worried about his funding. Should he say that it's okay? So the level
I've heard that conversation actually. She recorded that conversation. I've actually heard it. It's incredible. Because he's basically saying, okay, so you're happy for people to die. And he's basically saying, well, yeah.
You know, wait.
That was the summary of it, really.
Yeah. It was crazy. And I just saw it in the book. I think he put the transcript of it in there, and you just think, God, these people, like when you have, these bodies giving money to, these institutions, universities, scientists, projects, and they then can't go against the narrative or they get their funding pulled. What is that other than corruption? And it's not making anything safer for us. Yeah,
absolutely. I mean, what was interesting, in March 2020, I came across a research paper, albeit it was from China, but it came to me via a very credible doctor. And it was a study done with hydroxychloroquine, azithromycin, zinc, and heparin. And they treated people with the novel illness, and they were using PCR tests on them. And 100% of the people that got the full protocol, 100% of them were PCR negative within 5 days and symptom free within 5 days. Now, I think there was one group that just had hydroxychloroquine and azithromycin. I think there was one group that just had hydroxychloroquine and zinc. They still got results, but they took a lot longer.
Right.
So in March 2020, we already had a cure.
Sorry, well, the hydroxychloroquine wasn't working if they didn't put the zinc in it. So they had to put the zinc in it to help it get absorbed. Or it was working, but not as effectively. Yeah.
And then they did a study in, I think it was Switzerland, where they gave the participants a fatal dose of hydroxychloroquine and then said, well, it doesn't work. And in fact, it kills people. So, well, if you give anyone a lethal dose of anything, it will kill them. Right?
It's mad.
So, yeah, that's the crazy world that we've been living in. And just going back to, you mentioned another medication beginning with M that was used in a lot of the care homes as part of end-of-life care for anyone that came in with any kind of respiratory illness. Have you seen the recent data? I know Professor Norman Fenton and I know Dr. John Campbell has shared the data with people. Have you seen that data and how it correlates between the prescribing of that drug beginning with M and all-cause mortality back in the spring of 2020, the thing that we called the first wave? Have you seen that?
I haven't seen the data, but what I did see was a documentary on Ickonic called A Good Death. And they spoke to a lot of people who's, it was, I mean, it was horrific when you watched it. And these poor people had no idea what they were being put on. Their families had no idea what they were being put on. Some of their families were sitting by their loved ones, watching the nurses alter the doses and increase the doses of this drug. And then coupled with morphine, completely, I mean, they're giving them something that stops their breathing and slows their breathing for people that can't breathe and relaxes them so they can't take those deep breaths. And what are they, what were they doing? And so, I mean, I haven't seen the data, but I know that was going on, and I'm sure there's a high correlation.
Well, you're absolutely spot on. So I know recently Chris Whitty came out and said the reason why there's been an increase in heart attacks in the young is because they haven't been prescribed enough statins. So then obviously people like Dr. John Campbell and Professor Norman Fenton went onto a website that shows how many prescriptions of each drug has been given. And what it showed was that statins have just continually gone up over the last few years. So that was a lie.
Yeah.
So we knew that was a lie. But then what they've done with this drug that begins with M is they've gone to the same database and looked at how many prescriptions were given during that period of time. And then if you overlay all-cause mortality, it looks exactly the same. It's scarily the same. It looks like you've just got tracing paper and you've just done the graph.
See, and this is what I was saying, like at the start, the fear was being ramped up to the point where, people were thinking that all these deaths were from like a disease, but no one was thinking about what they had been doing with such drugs and then, ventilators and everything else. So, it was just, I think the evidence is there really. If people want to look, and that's the thing, they're never going to show it on the BBC. They're never going to show it on ITV or Sky News. And you'll probably struggle to get it on anything where there's anything, on TV where Ofcom are governing everyone. So the only place it will be talked about will be online. And then you have people that are so addicted to the BBC that are going to think, because it's online, it's not real, but you can't talk about it. Like all these people, I'm sure Dr. Fenton and everyone else would go on the BBC and talk about it in a heartbeat. They're just not allowed to. So we're never going to hear it there.
Yeah, only Dr. Gates is allowed on BBC.
Yeah.
But then if you give them tens of millions of pounds a year, I guess you've earned it, I guess.
It's unbelievable.
So just going back again, what did you think when the face masks were first mandated on public transport, shops and restaurants?
I just thought it was really stupid. I thought, what's that going to do? A virus? It's just the most ridiculous thing ever. And I refused from day one. I was like, that's it. Actually, no, that is a lie. Oh, there was a picture floating around of me in one. And a friend of mine was in America where you weren't allowed an exemption. And she was like, I'm going to make these masks that people can reuse. Will you just do a picture in one? I'm like, I think this is a really stupid idea because I think that they don't work and I don't think you should do it, but you're my friend and I'll do it. And then the next day I was like blasting them. And so she took it down, but someone has tried to use that to discredit me in what I say about masks and the fact that I refused to wear them. And I actually refused to carry an exemption. I made exemption cards for my sister, for her friends and for my friends, because they were a little bit afraid. And they wanted to show their exemptions. I was like, people can come up to me and I'll just, I'll tell them I'm exempt if I need to. So I never wore them. I thought it was absolute rubbish. And I made sure to tell everyone, I'm not just exempt. I think they're absolute rubbish as well. So, it was stupid. It was utterly stupid. And the sad thing about it is, and I think I was guilty of this as well, is that I did post a couple of videos of people getting arrested for not wearing face masks. And I wanted to post them because I was saying, like, this is what is going to happen if we allow it to happen. But I think it actually had the opposite effect. And I think it scared people because I think people then thought, oh, look, if I don't wear one, I might get arrested. But that wasn't the case. I never wore one at all. I didn't comply with any of it. And I never actually had a problem. If I got approached by somebody at a supermarket, I was very polite. And I just said, look, I'm sorry, I'm exempt. I can't, I'm not going to wear one. And by the way, they're really stupid anyway, but I'm exempt. And so I think there was a lot going on around there. I think a lot of people knew they were stupid, but didn't want the dirty looks, didn't want to be shouted at, didn't want the drama. And I think when people were posting, arguments about them online, I think that was encouraging the real Karens to like start mouthing off as well when they saw someone not wearing them.
Yeah, I mean, even though I've worked in health for 27 years, I'd never really looked into masks before. The only time I ever really saw a mask was when I go to the dentist. And so, like everything else, I wanted to look into, okay, so what does the mask actually do? And I remember very early on the high wire with Del Bigtree, he got two ladies from OSHA who specialize in PPE, and they train medical professionals how to wear PPE, or not just medical, but other people as well. And they said, well, first of all, masks only work if you wear them properly, and you have to be trained to wear them and fit them properly. And she said, secondly, if a man's got facial hair, or these days women, that's another story. They don't work, right? And then they say, well, the other thing is, if you're covering your nose and your mouth, which is your breathing apparatus, your blood oxygen levels drop about 20%, which is massive.
Yeah.
And your blood carbon dioxide increases by 50%, which is massive. And if you do that on a regular basis, eventually that's going to make you sick. It also tends to make people feel anxious. It makes people chest breathe, which is why they feel anxious. Now, when you chest breathe, you go into a stress response, which reduces your immune system, which makes you more susceptible to illness, right? And then if you're not changing them every 20 minutes, the moisture from your exhalation will start to gather bacteria and fungi, which you're then going to inhale.
Yeah.
You know, your lungs have already exhaled all these toxins. Now you're trapping them on this mask and now you're breathing them in. So, you know, it was an absolutely stupid idea. And, you know, it really saddens me that so many people just went, oh, okay, that's what we have to do. And they're going to work, you know, and I know so many people that still believe that they actually did work.
I mean, it's stupid, isn't it? My sister actually was wearing them at the start, and I'd go into shops with her and she'd grab it out of her handbag or her pocket. And I'm thinking, well, first of all, you know, that's not sterile, is it? So what are you doing? You're putting that on your face. Then she got a sinus infection and stopped, actually. It gave her a sinus infection putting this grubby mask on. And like, as you said, there's all this cross-contamination, you're touching it and everything. If it was something deadly, like, so, for example, if Ebola was spreading, it would take a lot more than one of those little masks for me to leave the house. I can tell you that. If I knew it was happening around my village, I'd want something that's going to do a lot more than that. So I think they do nothing. But then the way you handle them, it just makes no logical sense. I mean, come on, use some critical thinking. If you're taking it off, screwing it up, putting it in your pocket, reusing it, it's not going to do anything at all whatsoever, except maybe in your mind you think you're not going to, it's not going to do anything. You're not going to catch anything, but it just makes zero logical sense. And I just don't know how anyone can think they work. And I still see people, it's funny. I just went on holiday. I saw two people wearing them and they were these obese people. And I thought, you know what? You've had 3 years. You've had 3 years to do something about your health, but you've chosen to wear a mask and you think that's what's going to keep you healthy. Yeah,
it's sad, isn't it? It just makes me feel sad, you know? I had a couple of interesting experiences. Again, I've never wore a mask. Now, in 2020, when I was filling up my car, I would use an app because that would mean I wouldn't have to go in the shop. It means I would, you know, all the hassle. And I was actually coming back from London. I'd seen a client in London and I was driving back and I was almost out of petrol. And I thought, oh, I better stop. So I went into the petrol station, got my app out and my app just wasn't working. And I thought, oh, I've got to go in to pay for my petrol. Didn't have a mask. If I did, I still wouldn't have put it on.
Yeah.
So anyway, so I've gone in and I'm stood there. Everyone's staring at me. No one said anything, but everyone is staring at me. And I thought, okay. I was kind of waiting for someone to say something, but anyway, no one did. Anyway, so I've paid my petrol. I've turned around and there's two police officers standing right behind me. And I thought, oh no, they're going to arrest me. And I just walked around them and they didn't do anything. So that was good. And then I had another time when I went to my dentist. My dentist is in Harley Street in London. And they'd just moved venues. I hadn't been to this new venue on Harley Street. And I got there and there's stairs going up. And I thought, okay, that's obviously the way I need to go. But every 6 feet, there was someone standing there on the stairway wearing a mask. And it's signs everywhere. Sanitize your hands. You must wear a mask, 6 feet apart, all that kind of stuff. And I thought, well, my appointment's in 1 minute. Yeah. The stairs are quite a long way out. I thought, if I stand here, I could be here for half an hour. So I thought, I'm not having this. I just walked past every person on the stair. Again, they're all staring at me as if to say, what are you doing? What are you doing? And I got to the top and the door was closed. And I just looked at the guy who was first in the queue. I just sort of looked at him as if to say, why are you waiting? He didn't say anything back to me. He was just looking at me like I was about to kill him because I didn't have a mask on. And I just opened the door. I walked in and there was a nurse at the main reception. She was in a mask, and I just said, "Oh, can you tell me where?" I won't say the name. The clinic is where I was going, and she went, "Oh yeah, it's down there on the right." I said, "Thank you," and I walked down, and I walked in to my dentist, and their receptionist had a mask on. There was someone in the waiting room had a mask on, and I just sort of nodded at him as if to say, hello. And he went in for his appointment. So I'm standing there in the waiting room, just me and the receptionist. And I've been standing there about 5-10 minutes. And I just looked at the receptionist. I said, "Do you need me to wear a mask?" And she went, "No." I was like, great. I mean, I wouldn't have worn one anyway.
England was funny because England just wasn't too bad. I remember, I wish my experience in the petrol station was the same. So I went into this petrol station. I was in California, and I could travel because I'm an American citizen as well, so I don't need to be jabbed. So I was over in LA, and I said, you pay up front before your petrol, unlike in the UK.
Yeah,
so I went in, put 20 quid on the desk, $20 on the desk. I said, $20, please. Went back out, stood at my pump trying to do it. And I'm like, nothing's coming out. So I went back and I waved. I went, "Hiya, my pump's not working." He goes, "You didn't wear a mask." And I went, "Yeah, but the money is already on the table." No, you didn't wear a mask, so we can't turn it on. I went, "Okay." So I walked in and I grabbed my 20 quid off the table, my $20 off the table without a mask. And I went to a petrol station down the road. But they were so insane in America. I can't even tell you how weird California was, because it wasn't the whole of America, because I also went to Florida in the same trip, which was completely different, and I didn't have to wear a mask. But in California, they were mental. Like, can you imagine? The $20 is already on the table. Just press the button so I can get my petrol. But no. But anyway, I didn't kind of, at the time, promote any of those stories by talking about them, because I didn't want to put people off in England from not wearing them, because I think, like you said, people were actually quite lenient and not so bad if you didn't wear one. And I wish people had just been brave enough to just say no. The people, because there's so many people knew, and you knew people knew, because the moment they said you don't have to wear a mask, 90% of people didn't wear a mask. So they know it's rubbish. They can't all think, "Oh, today must be okay." They have to know, and they're just basically following it to comply.
Yeah. I did hear there was one guy who was on a bus. I'm pretty sure it was London. And he didn't have a mask on. And this guy went up to him quite aggressively and said, "Put your mask on." And he said, "No, I'm exempt." He said, "Put your mask on." He said, "No, I'm exempt." Well, the guy then beat him up so bad, he put him in a coma.
Wow.
Because he wasn't wearing a mask.
And these people are crazy, and they think that it's, what are they doing it for? The good of humanity, to put somebody in a coma.
And there was a lady, I think it was in Australia, who was killed by security staff in a hospital for not wearing a mask.
Yeah, and the worst thing, I think it could have been Canada, but the worst thing was it went to court. It could be a different one. It went to court, and then the judge or whatever ruled that nothing should happen, because it was such a time when people were so afraid that, these poor security guards that killed somebody, their actions were kind of justified because of the fear going on. I mean, it's completely and utterly crazy. Yeah. Or, and in Australia, where little kids, needed a heart operation, but they weren't allowed to cross states to go to a different hospital because, they had to keep each state separated and closed. I mean, the madness that went on for the supposed greater good is actually disgusting.
Yeah. What do you think was the craziest restriction, guideline or mandate that we've had over the last 3 years?
I mean, they've all been crazy and stupid. The funniest to me was the fact that you couldn't, walk down the street with a friend or walk in the countryside with a cup of tea, because that was considered a picnic. Or the Scotch egg thing, or they're going to they taped off areas in supermarkets when you're already in there anyway. So there was a lot of really stupid things. But then there was a lot of things that, thank God, I never had to experience, which I think would make you hold a lot of resentment inside, like, that you couldn't have more than a certain amount of people at a funeral, or weddings had to be cancelled. To me, Like if that had happened, I think I would probably harbor a lot more anger inside me. You know, as I've said, I've been really lucky where, first of all, I didn't comply with anything and I found it all completely nonsensical. I didn't comply, but there was nothing really forced on me. I mean, I couldn't travel, but, you know, I didn't care. But it wasn't like I was forced, you know, somebody had passed away and I wasn't able to go to their funeral or something like that. Thank God, you know, that didn't happen to me. But, you know, there was crazy and upsetting. And then there was just absolute stupidity that people, I mean, I put a picture of my sister and I are sitting on a bench drinking a coffee when you weren't allowed to be drinking anything outside and you weren't allowed to sit on a bench. I had people, and I just wanted to wind up the idiots, but also show people that, you know, nothing's going to come to you if you do. Don't be afraid of not complying. And I had people tagging Staffordshire Police saying I was like this selfish murderer. And they're like, Staffordshire Police, come and, you know, do something about it. I'm like, dude, they can't even come to your house when you get robbed or your car gets burgled. They're not going to come to my house because I'm sitting on a bench drinking a coffee. I mean, they could, but they didn't. So, you know, I just kind of wanted to demonstrate the absolute stupidity in the rules.
Yeah, I think for me, the one that stands out, I mean, some of them you mentioned are probably more silly, but, you know, when you walk into a restaurant, you had to put a face mask on. You walk to the table. Once you sat down, you could take it off. And then if you wanted to go to the toilet, you had to put it back on. And then if you wanted to leave the restaurant, you had to put it back on. Or on an aeroplane, as long as you were eating, you didn't have to have it on. I mean, how ridiculous is that?
Oh, it was so stupid. And there were times, you know what, I like nibbled food all the way to LA one time. I was traveling. I made sure I had water. And anytime one walked by, I was like sipping my water. But also California, again, I would say how California was even more stupid. They wanted you to put it up and down between bites. And then they had people that played instruments in the band, like, I don't know, the wind instruments. And they had masks that just covered their noses so their mouths could blow into their trumpets. I mean, it was stupid, just so stupid.
Crazy. And did you fall out with friends or family over your views?
Yeah, I not so much my family. My family's very small. My parents thought I was insane to start off with and then realised. My sister's like, oh, Leilani, you always think you're above the rules. And I'm like, no, not every rule. If a rule makes sense, I will stick to it, but not because it's the rule, but because it makes sense. But if something doesn't make sense and is stupid, I'm going to use my critical thinking and I'm not necessarily going to comply with it. You know, there's speed limits on the road outside me that are 60 miles an hour. I don't even go 60 miles an hour. I go 30 miles an hour because they're such windy little lanes. It would be stupid. So I use my common sense. And the same with this. It's like, it's stupid. I'm not going to comply with them. You know, I follow the basic rules. I don't know what you want to call them, universal law or whatever, which is do not harm or do not steal. And do, you know, and that includes don't steal anyone's freedom. So I'm not going to comply with this nonsense that's stealing my freedom. But yeah, I think, what was the question? I do this all the time.
So did you fall out? Did you fall out with people over your views?
Yes, and my friends, I lost half of my friends in Los Angeles. As I said, I lived in Los Angeles for 17 years before I moved back here. And when people saw my social media that I refused to wear a mask, that I wasn't complying, I lost probably half of my American friends. And so be it, you know. None of them have really come back and said they've seen them right. They're just, you know, very quiet. And I did have, but I have to say, on a really positive thing, that things could be changing. I had some big fights with a friend of mine's husband who thought that anyone that didn't get the, whatever you want to call it, gene therapy, was a really selfish person that should probably not be allowed into work. So obviously there were some big arguments and it was kind of awkward if we went out for like a group dinner or anything. I'd kind of avoid it. And I got a message saying that he'd listened to a podcast and listened to a couple of injured people and had done a complete and utter U-turn. And I was like, wow, this was somebody who was so adamant in his beliefs that for him to do a U-turn and to actually come and tell me that he's done a U-turn is huge. Like, you know, that's pretty massive. So I do think that people are seeing what's going on and becoming more aware now of everything. And, you know, well, I mean, you can't not, from injuries to the economy to everything, you can kind of see how wrong people have got this.
Well, even Gates and Fauci have come out recently and said that the injections don't work. Wow. After they've made their billions of dollars off of it, they've now come out and said, well, it doesn't work. So we'll have to do better next time.
That's the thing. And it wouldn't even surprise me if they shorted their stock just before coming out and saying it as well, you know, just to really like.
That's exactly what Gates did.
Did he really? Wow. Why does that not surprise me? They're animals. No, they're not animals, because animals they're just like vile creatures. They're horrible, vile creatures they're parasites, actually.
I think that's an insult to parasites, actually.
That's true.
You're listening to the Radical Health Rebel podcast.
Just a brief interruption to this podcast to talk about adult acne. Now, did you know that 40 to 54% of men and women older than 25 years will have some degree of facial acne, and that clinical facial acne persists into middle age in 12% of women and 3% of men? I know only too well the devastating effects that acne can have on your confidence and your self-esteem, and how it can easily destroy your social life, your career, and your relationships. I know this only too well because I suffered from severe cystic acne from age 13 to 31. Over an 18-year period, I visited my doctor on many occasions, and his only suggestions were acne creams, harsh cleansers, and antibiotics that weren't working and were actually making my skin worse. After 18 years of struggle and thousands of pounds invested in treatments that didn't work, through my professional education, I began to learn that what my doctor had told me was untrue, and that diet was directly related to acne, plus other factors such as food sensitivities, toxicity, hormones, and balancing the body's microbiome. Putting what I had learned into practice, I managed to rid myself of acne over 20 years ago, and have been helping others to do the same for well over a decade. By teaching people what foods cause acne, what food sensitivities each individual has, how to optimize their detox pathways, how to reduce environmental stresses and toxins, and how to balance hormones, especially those related to the mTOR pathway, a major causal factor with acne, I've been able to help many other adults overcome their acne nightmare too. So if you would like more information on how to overcome your adult acne, please go to www.skinwebinar.com. That's www.skinwebinar.com, where you can also request an acne breakthrough call with me to see if you are suitable for my Eliminate Adult Acne coaching program, where you can once and for all learn how to overcome your adult acne. Now, back to the podcast. Just looking a bit more ahead, so looking at 2022, what do you make of the increase in all-cause mortality last year, and why do you think the authorities aren't really interested in looking into that?
Well, I think they know the answer. I think it's because of a lot of the things that they've done. They don't want to look out into it. They don't want to get sued. They don't want the outrage that if suddenly everyone realizes what's causing it. Because here's the thing, they can keep saying, oh, it's because of the NHS and our ambulances are slow and blah, 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 which I'm sure is a little bit. But when it's happening and there's like, you know, these huge increases in Germany, in Australia, in Canada, in America, in places with great healthcare systems, you can't blame the NHS. So it's not the NHS. So let's just take that out the equation right now, you know, and the backlogs and everything, because because I can assure you in America where people have got private health insurance, there is probably no backlog on getting statins prescribed and what have you. So there's one thing that's going on and everybody is avoiding talking about it within government. And they're actually, even if you take Andrew Bridgen, who's come out and he said he's got these injuries and they can't use the
Sorry, just for the American listeners, he's an MP in government in the UK.
And so he's an MP. He was the Conservative whip, whatever that actually means. I'm not sure, but quite high up, I believe. I should know these things, but I don't. But
I think that just means he gets. I think that just means he gets to be part of the Conservative Party and he's able to vote in Parliament. And
so he's got suspended, but he got suspended because he said it was a crime against humanity and the greatest one since a certain thing, which I don't want to say in case it affects like the YouTube algorithm. So I won't repeat the quote that he quoted.
The thing that happened in the 1930s and 40s in Germany and Poland and places like that.
Yeah, around the Second World War. So he quoted on Twitter a quote and got suspended from the Conservative Party because they called him anti-Semitic, which is the new slur. Because if they can't get you with an anti-vaxxer slur anymore. They can't get you with that because they're labeling everybody that. I mean, he's had 2 of them, right? And he's got the injuries from it. So how can you call somebody that's had it anti? I don't know if you can say these words. I've got to be careful with YouTube. So. You know what I'm saying? So they've got this slur that they've been using for people like me, people like you. Then they've extended it to people that have or even had it, that are speaking against it. So they've got to come up with these new slurs. So, they'll do anything. They will do anything they can to ignore looking at the actual evidence. And there's one thing. There's more excess deaths now than in the times where this kind of supposed virus was at its worst and strongest. So what could it be? Well, I think it's the thingamajiggies because I don't hear of anyone getting sudden, myocarditis or just dropping dead unless they've had it. Had the
experiment. Yeah, I mean, that was that American football player who recently had a heart attack during a game, and he was interviewed. I saw it yesterday, I think, or the day before. And they asked him, what did the doctor say why you had a heart attack? And he thought about it for some time, and then he said, I don't want to talk about it.
I mean, that silence.
That tells a big story, doesn't it?
That silence just told you everything, didn't it? And it's like, wow. Well, I suppose you can't play American football anymore, so maybe some hush money is needed. Maybe.
Yeah, maybe. So on top of the so-called pandemic, we've had many other things going on at the moment, like the war in Ukraine, gender politics, climate change, the war on farmers, the war on meat consumption, climate change, net carbon zero, government interfering with social media. So we saw Mark Zuckerberg on Joe Rogan's podcast talk about that. We've got the Twitter files. And we've also got Big Brother Watch uncovering the 77th Brigade here in the UK, who were spying on UK citizens who dared to have an alternative view. So there's quite a lot going on. In addition, in the UK, the government is already pushing through the introduction of digital IDs, central banking digital currency, 13-minute cities, the online safety bill and the public order bill. Now, there's quite a lot to think about there. Do you think all these initiatives are exclusive from each other, or do you think there's a more coordinated plan being rolled out?
Oh, it's all coordinated, and I think it all comes together, and I think it's all being pushed at the same time just to put people in such confusion and to overwhelm them so you can't sit and take each thing individually and try and fight against it because you just got so much at the same time. You're like, where do I even start? And I think that that's what's happening to a lot of people at the moment. It's just so overwhelming for them. And also, it's going to take a lot to like really look into why each thing is happening, you know, because you can't trust your usual mainstream news sources.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, I think you can sum it up pretty quickly by saying it's Agenda 30, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
Or Agenda 2030, which used to be Agenda 21. It's you know, it's a plan being rolled out by the WEF, basically.
That's the thing. You seem to have all these people, you know, people, it's such a conspiracy theory that these outside forces like run the world. But if you see that all these governments are acting in unison and they're all taking advice from these bodies like the WEF, right, who are unelected billionaires and technocrats and people that have just got untold amounts of wealth and influencing our politicians, then what is it other than all these people having a massive impact on our lives and changing everything? So it is Agenda 30, absolutely, for sure. And it's all of it is working towards that. And you can see it. But then, you know, they have been very blatant and they have, you know, talked about Agenda 30. So how anyone can sit there and think that it's a conspiracy theory, it's beyond me, because it's out in the open. But I think it's that it's people just, you know, kind of in denial that it's happening. That why would these people want to do this to us?
Yeah, I mean, I was speaking to someone yesterday about 15-minute cities and the central bank and digital currency, and his response, it will never happen. And I said, yeah, but the 15-minute cities is already happening.
Yeah.
You know, and as we know, Oxford City, you know, 98% of the residents voted against it, and the council said, well, we're going to do it anyway. So what does that say about democracy?
Well, exactly. It's like, why even vote if you're not even going to listen to what people are saying? It's like, I do think democracy is dead. And it's the same, you know, just as we have, I think it's actually been dead for a very long time. And the illusion that it's even alive is dead now, because when they installed Richie Sunak, who no one voted for, I think it was pretty obvious then that this is like, you know, it was a coup and this is a guy that's being now installed into it.
So you mentioned conspiracy theories. What would you say if someone's listening to this and they think that we are conspiracy theory nut jobs?
I think you have to read through the evidence of what's out there and what's being put out by people like the WEF, so that when we say, look, this is what they're aiming for, right, you can see the goals. So find out what their goals are. Like, you know, what are their goals? Less cars, less you will own nothing and be happy. Think about what they've actually said, and you will see how everything that they are doing is working towards that. So if you're going to own nothing and be happy, then think about what that means. If you have to rent everything, who are you going to rent it from? There's going to be a very small group of people that you then have to rent from. And that is those people. Yeah. You know, think about what they're doing with 15-minute cities and everything. That, you know, they don't want people traveling. They've said that because of net zero, which, by the way, drives me insane, because the same people calling for net zero and the same people that are trying to convince you that carbon dioxide is this deadly, poisonous, dangerous gas have actually been very, very silent about one of the most horrific environmental disasters that has happened in Ohio, with the train derailment and there's been another train crash as well with hazardous. There's been a second one. And there's, you know, this is what I mean. It's just, you've got these people that can't even do their jobs properly. And what's going to happen is these chemicals now are going to go into the land. They're going to affect the farmland. They're going to affect the rivers. There are fish that have already been found dead in the rivers. There are animals 10 miles away that have died. Wildlife's dying all over the place. Then it's going to come, you know, you're going to have the rain come and wash it all into the land and the soil. And it's all very fertile agricultural land around Ohio. You know, the water's damaged, the air's damaged. And these people that are convincing you that carbon dioxide is basically the building blocks of plants. It's what plants take in and turn into oxygen and turn into, you know, their substance and their leaves and their bark and they've convinced you that carbon dioxide is so poisonous and yet are so silent over this. So these are the people that then say, well, we want less cars on the road. And how are they going to do that? Well, they're going to tax it out of you and make it so you can't even afford to drive a car. And it's so inconvenient with the 15-minute cities. And then look at what's happened with Ukraine, because I called out the Ukraine and Russia war right at the start for exactly what it was, and then everyone's blaming these price hikes on Putin. And then you see that British Gas, Exxon, Shell, they're all recording their record profits, like 4 times higher than the profits last year. But we want to blame, we're going to blame Putin for it. So there's a lot of convenient excuses for things, and that are coming out, and you find out what it is. And like Nord Stream pipeline, for example, right? They've just said that it's more than likely that America has blown that up. And the same net zero people didn't say a single word about all the methane escaping because of the USA. So when you look at the hypocrisy, when you look at their goals, and then it's not really a conspiracy theory to see that everything that's going on is heading towards those goals, and they're not good goals, or they're not goals that are going to help humanity. They're going to help them, a handful of people. When you look into the whole net zero scam and you see the amount of investment that Bill Gates' cronies and the people in the WF and all these people have, and our politicians have put into green energy and renewables, then you're like, oh, no wonder they're pushing it. Because if we all move to it, then they're going to make all the money, just like Big Pharma. And when you see all the shady deals that have gone on between Pfizer and Moderna and the EU government and all of that, when you look at what's actually going on, the PPE deals between, Matt Hancock and his mates, when you see all of that, how can you say it's a conspiracy theory? Yeah.
So really, if anyone is listening to this or watching this and they're thinking we're conspiracy theory nut jobs, then I guess the answer is perhaps you need to do a little bit more investigation into why we're saying this and what backs up what we're saying. And you might want to start with Agenda 2030 because it's got it all in there.
Yeah. It's all in there. All their goals are in there.
Yeah. It's why, several people have been able to predict what was going to happen. Like, I have lunch with my parents every Sunday and I basically tell them what's going to happen and then it happens. Right? It's not because I'm psychic, although I am a bit psychic, but that's not the reason why. It's because they've written it down. That's why we know.
Exactly.
And we see it step by step being rolled out.
Exactly. It's like, it's not like we see into the future. We're just repeating what they've already said they plan to do.
Yeah. So, as I mentioned, the UK government is attempting to roll out digital ID, central bank digital currency, 15-minute cities, the online safety bill, the public order bill. And of course, we also have the WHO treaty. Which do you feel are the most dangerous of those policies?
I think the digital IDs, if they start trying to add on, the jab passports to it, but all of it, I think it's all linked, and the 15-minute cities as well, because that is going to harm people so much. Like, I think where I used to live, if you can't get from one side or the other, and you basically have to go the long way to cross streets, but then you're not to get round to a different part, but then you're not really allowed to because you can only do it on certain days. That's going to affect people's jobs so much, like people like babysitters, cleaners, plumbers, handymen, electricians, because they then have to pay to go round to a different part of the city. It's going to affect shops because people are no longer, and restaurants and pubs because people are like, oh, well, I can't get there, so I'll just have to stay in my little sector. And it's becoming very Hunger Games.
Yeah, I mean, the way that I see it going is that, some of the things that we're starting to uncover in terms of how these things are going to run if we let it happen, which let's hope we don't, it's going to start off at one level, but then as soon as we accept it, they're going to start ramping it up.
Yeah.
And then it might be, okay, 15-minute city means you can't use your car outside that zone. Or it might be you can for 100 days a year, but then it'll be 50 days a year.
Yeah.
Then it will be 10 days a year. Then it will be you can't use your car outside that zone. And then further down the line, it will be you can't go outside that zone at all. That is it. You're stuck in that zone. Or, you know, with the central banking digital currency, they're talking about in the UK will be allowed, I think it's 20,000 or 22,000 maximum. I mean, what if you have to put aside 30,000 a year to pay your tax? How does that work?
And this is the thing. This is the thing. And I think the only way out of this is non-compliance. And, you keep using cash as much as possible. And I mean, that's the really important thing. You like make sure that cash is always circulating. But yeah, I think the only things we can do now is like make sure we don't comply with these crazy things and find loopholes and find ways around it, just like we did with COVID. Sorry, just like we did with the disease, like we did with the masks, like we did with the gene therapies. I think you just have to make sure that you're strong enough to say no, and I'm not gonna take part in this, and then set up alternatives as well. I think that's a really important thing, making sure that you can set up alternatives.
Yeah, and what you said earlier about bartering, that might be really useful as well. I was listening to someone the other day, I can't remember who it was now, and he was saying when he was in the ex-Soviet Union, so he's Russian, and he was saying when the Soviet Union first fell apart, everyone was bartering with vodka. That was the currency, right? So, I guess you've got to think outside the box, because if it does go through, I don't know what you feel, but for some of us, the only way we're going to survive that is to have an alternative way of life. Almost, another word for it is a black market, right?
Yeah, and I think there will be, and that is the one thing. I think people are very good at adapting, and those that can adapt will survive it. So you have to think. And I mean, like, look, I suppose I've always been a bit of a doomsday prepper. So for me, I became very worried about this more so than ever when the lockdowns happened. So I begged my fiance if we could move somewhere where I could have my horses at home, so I would never have to worry about being stopped on the drive, or how many miles I'm allowed to drive, or anything, or anything like that. So I've already got ahead of it. So if it was to happen, I'm prepared, because I do believe deep that they could try and bring in, these carbon credits. You can't drive more than this many miles a week. You can't go more than this far from your house. So although I don't ever want to comply with it, you've also got to take the steps to protect yourself. So what else can you do? Well, you have to think about how you can barter, what skills you can swap, what, products you can swap, have cash, have goods that you can trade and swap. So I think it's something that people, need to think about without driving them. And that's the thing, without driving themselves into a place of fear, because fear is just going to stress you, and that's not good. So, if you can just get ahead of things just so you can have a bit of peace of mind, which is what I have. I've, set myself up so I can have peace of mind that I'm, kind of ahead of it. I think that's kind of the way forward, and to always, don't be afraid of being non-compliant.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, I imagine there are people listening or watching to this that, we're probably preaching to the choir to a certain extent, but they might be thinking of loved ones of themselves that maybe want to hear this message. But for my kind of usual viewers, what advice could you possibly give to them to help those that aren't seeing what we're seeing?
Oh, gosh, it's a hard one, isn't it? Because I just think I do sometimes think to myself, if you haven't seen it by now, will you ever see it? But I'm sure there are, because I think people become aware of things at, very, very different times. And I think the important thing is to allow people to change their minds. Don't come at it from anger or frustration, even though there are probably things that really, really anger you. If somebody, loved one of yours who's like been injured or harmed from the thing, if there are people that loved ones who committed suicide during the lockdowns. There are so many things that can make you angry and hold on to that. But I think the really important thing is to try and change the minds of other people, and you have to give them the space to see that they're wrong and admit that they're wrong, possibly repent for it, but give them the space to say, look, I was wrong, and understand that that's a big move for someone to be able to say that. And as I said, it's easy for me to say that because I didn't comply. I didn't ever miss out seeing my niece grow up. I didn't miss out with friends that I loved. My biggest loss for the whole of it was that I lost a couple of crappy friends who obviously weren't friends, right? So that's my biggest loss. So I'm in a different position where, for me, I don't have too much anger or resentment over it. And but and I'm not talking about those people like Piers Morgan or Esther Rantzen that were horrible and vile and bitter. But I'm talking about the people that just didn't know. Because what we need is for those people that are afraid to speak up, or those people that know deep down but were afraid to, kind of not follow the easy path and to stand up and say, look, I can see it's wrong. We want them to be on our side. We don't want to make everything us and them, because if we're going to fight this, we need to, kind of fight it together. So that's what I would say. I said probably, don't be hard on people and name call. Just try and slowly, gently ease them into seeing it with facts. And the facts are out there now. It cannot be hidden. I've just found out, I was talking to my fiance and I was like, how many people do we know that have been really injured by it? And it's a hard one because we don't know that many people that have had it, because we're in that kind of thing. And then we're like, gosh. And then next thing, it turns out that someone very, very close to him, only 38 years old, has now got myocarditis. And so it's there for people to see. Everyone knows somebody that's got something and has been hurt from it. So, you take that and then you can expand on it. And if people have seen, what's gone on over the last 3 years with masks, lockdown, jabs, then hopefully use that to say, are you we've seen how they lied to us about this. Do you really believe them about X, Y, Z? The BBC have lied and pushed this fear about this. Can you really still believe them, about, you say, the war, or about just about about anything that they're coming out with, that the climate is changing because of humans and we're all going to be underwater? Can you really believe it, or are they just pushing fear the way they did?
They had to stop using the term global warming because we know the globe has been cooling for the last 20 years.
Yeah, it's insane. And history only goes back, they say, the coldest in history. No, on coldest on record. The records are 150 years old. The Romans were growing grapes in Manchester, so it's not like the coldest on record. It's the coldest in the last 150 years, or the warmest in the last 150 years. And go back further. How many millions of years old is this planet? It's just, it's so obscene to say that these cars of, or the cars or the cows or whatever are doing this. The planet just has cycles.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I did a good episode with Jane Buxton, who wrote The Great Plant-Based Con, And we went into quite a lot of detail about the environment in that. So if anyone wants to listen to that, you can always go back and have a listen. So just want to change subject just a little, just to finish off. So as a health practitioner of 27 years, it's clear to me that you're very healthy. You know, I can generally see whether someone's healthy or not. And as this is a health podcast, it would be great if you could share your secrets with the audience as to how you stay so healthy.
Thank you. Right. So I'll start with what I don't have, and then what I do. So I don't have things like artificial sweeteners. I don't have diet drinks or so-called like diet food or, low fat, because there's fats such as avocado oil or olive oil that I do have. So I don't go for those fatty things. I don't like artificial stuff. I'll have butter rather than margarine. So that's one thing. And then I don't have, so as I said, I don't have fizzy drinks. I don't drink a lot of alcohol, don't smoke, don't take drugs. If I've got a headache, for example, then I think, what might be causing me this headache? And it's usually something like dehydration. So I'll drink lots of water. So it's very rare that I'll even take like a paracetamol. Sometimes people go, have you taken a paracetamol? I'm like, God, no, I didn't even think of that. Like I'll be moaning about a headache or something, and it's usually because of water. I drink loads and loads of water. As I said, I don't drink a lot of alcohol, maybe a couple of glasses of wine a week, or I might go 2 weeks without anything. Exercise wise, well, I do I haven't been going to the gym as much because I do 2 hours in the morning mucking out my horses, which is a lot of lifting and kind of running around. I've got to take them down to the fields. I've got to bring them back. So there's a lot of walking. And I'm riding my horses. I do a bit of yoga because I get from horse riding, obviously I get some aches and pains. So I do a bit of yoga or stretches. I wouldn't say yoga. I'd say I stretch a lot. And what else is there? Oh, I get lots of good sleep. I sleep a lot. If I'm tired or if I'm feeling under the weather, I'll rest. And that usually clears me up before I ever get sick. If I'm just feeling a bit run down or tired, I'll just try and sleep a lot and rest. And then, I've got the horses, so I'm outside all the time as well.
Yeah, certainly being outside in nature has a massive effect on people's health. We didn't evolve living in concrete buildings. So getting outside in nature definitely has an effect. I guess your life is relatively stress-free.
Yeah, I think it's stress-free. The only thing, the last 3 years have probably sent me a little bit grey. But but I do feel that a lot of the time I'm stressed worrying about other people, and rather than, myself, or worried about people as a whole and society as a whole and where it's going. And sometimes I do think, focus on the things that you can kind of control. And actually that's why I think sometimes, when I went to the anti-lockdown protests and stuff, that really helped me physically as well, because it released a lot of the stress, because I felt I was around like-minded kind of people, and it was kind of putting out there that, I didn't agree with things, and it was probably about the best I could do at the time.
Yeah. Well, as Czech practitioners, we teach what's called the 6 foundations of health. So number 1 is your thoughts. Number 2 is breathing correctly. Number 3 is hydration. Number 4 is nutrition. Number 5 is movement. And number 6 is sleep and rest. So it seems like you've got most of those nailed already.
See, that's why you thought I was part of it, because I agree 100% that all of those are just so important.
And you don't eat meat, do you?
No, I don't eat meat. And it's not because I'm trying to save the world or be net zero. I just love animals. So I just love
fish.
Occasionally I do eat fish, but I just went away on holiday and I went snorkeling, and it's kind of put me off because the fish were so cute. So occasionally I do, but I know that vegetarians can lack B12. So I do make sure to take a B12 supplement. And I'm not one of those vegetarians that kind of eats loads of pasta, or I don't put like a soy meat alternative in my food unless I'm being really unhealthy. So I kind of, I don't add like, oh, I need to have meat. So what I'm going to do is get like some processed on my plate. I'm not kind of one of those. Yeah.
I mean, the other thing that, we go into quite a lot as well is about, eating foods that are right for you as an individual. There's no one diet that's good for everybody. And one of the things that determines what's right for you is your ancestry, right? Because, your DNA has evolved over many thousands of years. And I know, is it your mother? Where's your mother from?
Philippines.
Or that side of the family? Philippines.
Yeah, Philippines.
Right? So the Philippines, going back many years, would be kind of almost tropical rainforest type territory. Would that be right?
Mm-hmm.
So generally in those areas of the world, people tend to do better on a more of a lower meat type diet, because there's no big game meats available. Right. So your genetics actually helps you be a better vegetarian, or a healthier vegetarian anyway.
Oh, that's really interesting.
Good. Yeah. I mean, my episode that I did with Jane Buxton, there's some really good stuff on there for vegetarians. I mean, it definitely wasn't anti-vegetarian, but she talks a lot about some of the anti-nutrients that you can get from plants if you eat too many of them. So it's quite interesting. So anyone's vegetarian, check that one out.
I'll check that out for sure.
So before we wrap up, is there anything else you want to add?
No, I think we've covered a lot, haven't we?
We've covered quite a bit, haven't we?
We've definitely covered quite a lot. And I got my ranting about the insanity over the Ohio train crash and how no one's even talking about it.
Yeah, and it's interesting that they decided to blow that thing up with the residents still there. And then they evacuated them, and then they said it's safe to go back. And they've asked the Environmental Protection Agency, when are they going to go in and clean up? And they said when it's safe to do so. So it's safe for the public to go back with no hazmat suits and everything else that they would need. There's no information on how to make sure that their house doesn't get really badly affected. So these ladies were talking on the high wire this week, explaining to people that live there what they need to do. The government aren't telling them to do that. And the government staff aren't going anywhere near it yet because it's not safe. Yet they've told the people that live in that town to go back home and it's completely safe.
It's so upsetting.
That's the world we're living in.
It's so upsetting to me. It's just, I mean, I can't imagine it if it had happened, somewhere around here. I've got like 4 horses in the field, and it's like, what would have happened to them? What would have happened to all the beautiful wildlife and birds that live around here? It's so upsetting. And it's the same people saying it's safe as the same people that said, take the jab. It's safe and effective. It's safe and effective. The same people. Don't worry.
Yeah. Yeah. And what's next for Leilani?
What is next? Well, I'm still hosting right in the news right now with Gareth Icke on Ickonic. Mark Stein, who I used to work for on GB, I was contribute a bit on GB News. He is now not on GB News anymore. He's doing his own thing. So I am still a contributor to that, and I'll be on there once a week with him.
Awesome.
Every couple of weeks. Yeah.
And where can people find Ickonic and find Mark Stein?
So Ickonic is on Ickonic.com, but it's Ickonic spelt like David Icke, Ickonic. I'm not good at spelling out loud. I'd never do one of those spelling bees. So that's Ickonic.com. And Mark Stein is on steinonline.com. So he's streaming his shows once or twice a week on steinonline.com. Yeah, so
and I highly recommend if you haven't checked those out yet, you absolutely have to check those out because they're Ickonic's a great channel. It's got loads of good information on there. And Mark Steen is an absolute legend as well.
As I said, none of it's governed by Ofcom. So, we can all speak freely. We don't have to kind of watch what we're saying or anything else. So, so it's really great to be able to do that. And it's funny that I'm there because, it was never, like I said before earlier in the show, it was never like really my plan. So as long as I have a platform where, I can try and help and I can try and get people together to think, the people that can't say things out loud can say, oh, yeah, there are people that think this way. As long as I've got that kind of platform, then long may it continue. Otherwise, yeah, I'll just be riding horses.
Awesome. Leilani, thank you so much. I really, really enjoyed this episode. It's been great talking with you.
Brilliant. Thank you. Thank you very much for having me on.
No, it's been a pleasure. And to all the Radical Health Rebel tribe, if you know someone who would benefit from watching or hearing this episode, please make sure to share the love and forward it on to them. After all, the mission of this show is to help people lead a more fun-filled, healthy, productive, fulfilling and happy life. And if you appreciate my amazing guests like Leilani and the wisdom they share with you each week, and you'd like to appreciate the show by supporting the podcast, you can become a subscriber to the brand new Radical Health Rebel Podcast Plus, starting at just $3 a month. Or you can check out the 7-day free trial at our Patreon channel at patreon.com/Radical Health Rebel, where you can have access to lots of exclusive premium content and exclusive discount offers included in your membership. Full details can be found in the show notes. So that's all from Leilani and me for this week. But don't forget, you can join me same time, same place next week on the Radical Health Rebel podcast.
Thanks for tuning in to the Radical Health Rebel podcast with Leigh Brandon. You can find Leigh at www.bodycheck.co.uk. That's BODYCHEK.co.uk. Please hit the like button and share on your social media and with someone you feel will benefit from watching this episode. So together we can help them lead a healthier, more productive, fulfilling and happy life.